Good evening. I'm Michael Steele in for Simone Sanders. Breaking news out of Uvalde, Texas. A new report just released a short time ago says nearly 400 officers rushed to Robb Elementary School the day of the mass shooting. But systemic failures created a chaotic scene that delayed the response. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed. We have an update from Uvalde. In 187 minutes, that's how long it took President Trump to call off the violent mob storming the Capitol. And it's the focus of Thursday's primetime hearing of the January 6th committee. We're learning new details about the testimony to expect about Trump's failure to act during those 3 hours of terror. Plus, the latest post-Roe strategy Planned Parenthood in Wisconsin and Illinois states with restrictive trigger laws. You're watching Simone, and we've got a lot to talk about. We start with that breaking news. A new report from a Texas House Investigative Committee paints a damning portrait of the police response in Uvalde when a gunman murdered 19 children and 2 teachers in May. The committee learned that there were nearly 400 state and federal officers on the Robb Elementary School campus that day. And yet, as surveillance footage released by the Austin American-Statesman confirms, officers waited for more than an hour before finally confronting the shooter. The report states, at Robb Elementary, law enforcement responders failed to adhere to their active shooter training, and they failed to prioritize saving the lives of innocent victims over their own safety. And out of those 400 officers, as of now, according to the Texas Tribune, only 1 has been placed on leave. Here with the latest out of Uvalde is NBC's Priscilla Thompson. Priscilla, what else is there in this report?
Yeah, Michael, certainly another very difficult day here in this community of people begin to get some of the answers that they've been asking for and demanding over the past several weeks. And this report paints not a great picture of some of the failings here. And I wonder if it creates more questions in some of these families' minds about if some of these mistakes had been avoided, might more of those victims been able to be saved? We're seeing in this report things like the gunman had expressed violent tendencies and people knew that he had purchased these guns, but it appears that there was nothing done to sort of stop this from happening as it relates to that. We're also learning that room 111 had a faulty lock and that many people knew that this was a faulty lock on the door. It took a lot of extra effort to get that door locked, but that there was never a work order or anything like that put in order to fix that in the weeks leading up to this very tragic event. And I also am just seeing that one of these classrooms was actually the former the 4th grade classroom of the shooter. So this was his former classroom, and some things in this report saying that he had a bad experience whenever he was in 4th grade and may have been bullied. And so there may have been some sort of connection there. And in fact, only a few weeks earlier, he had talked about that with someone. So all of this, I think, raising more questions. And the families right now are in a meeting with committee members to try to learn a little bit more about this report and ask questions face to face before those committee members come out and speak publicly. But we did have an opportunity to speak with one of the victims' grandfather as he arrived here earlier today to pick up that report before it was released publicly. And I want to play a little bit about what he shared as he was getting his copy of the report.
If I was these officers, I would leave town. They don't deserve to be here. This report don't mean nothing to me. Because what happened has already happened. But is there any change doing? Anybody been fired? Is the chief still being paid? What's going on? Nobody else got answers for this.
And as we begin to speak to more families who have had time to review this report, it'll be interesting to see if we see similar feelings emerge. But I will say that man there, Vincent, the grandfather of Laila Salazar, he says that he doesn't know if he'll ever get the truth, if anyone here will ever get to the bottom of what really happened. But certainly this report very concerning in terms of some of the mistakes that have been highlighted. Michael?
So, Priscilla, in that sense, what do you think happens next? What do the families think happens next now that this report's been released?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what we expect to see for the rest of the day, we know that the committee is right now meeting with those families and finally getting to have a conversation about this face-to-face. And then they're going to come out in just a few hours and speak to the media and speak publicly about their findings and what all of this means. But having spoken to a number of different families in the community, I think the attention is turning towards accountability. They want to know what accountability is going to look like. Are people going to be fired? Are there going to be criminal investigations? And so that is where much of the conversation is turning to. You know, over the past several weeks, we've heard a lot of not wanting to rush to judgment and waiting until the investigation is complete, until we really understand what has happened. And now we have that information. So it's a question of what are the people who are in charge and in positions to make changes, be they systemic or sort of in terms of the people who are working in these jobs. It remains to be seen what action will be taken on that front, Michael.
NBC's Priscilla Thompson, thank you very much. There's a news conference with more details on the investigation at the top of the hour. We'll take it to you live when it happens. In other news, we're following, after weeks of hearings detailing the buildup of the January 6th riots, the January 6th committee will set their sights on what exactly President Trump was doing or not doing during those 187 minutes of calamity at the Capitol. Here's what committee member Congresswoman Elaine Luria said on CNN today about what we should expect.
We'll go through pretty much minute by minute during that time frame from the time he left the stage at the Ellipse, came back to the White House, and really sat in the White House, in the dining room, you know, with his advisors, urging him continuously to take action, to take more action. And not only was it a situation of not doing anything, at one point, the infamous tweet we know at 2:24, he actually egged people on by saying Vice President Pence didn't have the courage to, quote-unquote, do the right thing.
Congresswoman Luria adds that we will hear from witnesses who have not been included in previous hearings. New information could also emerge from the subject of the committee's most recent subpoena, the United States Secret Service. The Secret Service erased text messages from the day of the Capitol riot after the Homeland Security Inspector General requested to see them. The committee is demanding relevant text messages and any after-action reports relevant to January 6th. The Secret Service insists there was no insidious motive and that the erasure happened because of a, quote, device replacement program, end quote. If they're recovered, these texts could prove crucial to laying out the events of January 6th and sharpening public understanding of the insurrection for generations to come.